We're just going to take a few minutes to let everybody come on in. Happy Friday. Thumbs up if you're doing something this weekend you're excited for. Anyone? Oh, okay. Got a few. Right.
I'm just manning the waiting room, so definitely if I look distracted, that's why.
Thank you, Billy. Billy, do we know how many people were pre-signed up today?
I think it ended up being about 21 people.
Great.
Yeah. Someone signed up this morning, so I'm hoping they got their login information because I sent that out.
Good deal. Appreciate you. Okay, I'm going to keep talking just to make sure everybody's microphones and speakers are working, that they're able to hear us. But everyone who's coming in, you will be automatically on mute to start right now. And we're just giving time for everybody to sign in and get ready for our Building a Better Us Schoolhouse Rock presentation today, panel discussion. Excellent. So my name's Rochelle Pope. I'm currently located in Spokane. I'm a recent graduate from Whitworth and part of the WAMPed networking task force who puts on these particular events. And when we get started, we will kind of all go around and tell you who we are and who our panelists are. And we will jump right in here in just a couple minutes. Does everybody have their coffee and their water and all their good things for the morning? Excellent. Oh yeah, let's all see our coffee mugs today. Who's got a good one?
I'm kind of fine, Jane.
Excellent. And a shake. I love it. Got some bottled water. Perfect. Stay hydrated. It's going to be a hot weekend, at least over here. Here on the east side. Good morning, Ben. I see you joined us. We're just waiting for a few more people that we know are planning to be here this morning. All right. Great. Okay. Well, I think we'll give it about 1 more minute. Does that sound good, Billy? Okay. All right, let's see. Down on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a reactions tab. Gives you some options. Let's do a thumbs up if you prefer the beach, or the clapping hands if you prefer the mountains for your adventures. Thumbs up for the beach, clapping hands for mountains. Oh, I like both. Can I get mountains and beach? All right. Thumbs up if you prefer tea, or clapping hands if you prefer coffee. Clapping hands for coffee, thumbs up for tea. If you don't like anything, you can give me one of these.
Well, I'll go ahead, Rochelle, and just kind of welcome everybody and get it started. And then as people come in, I'll just keep admitting them and letting them know. So, hi, everyone. On behalf of the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, also known as WAMPed, and our networking task force, which is made up of me, Rochelle, and Astrid, we want to welcome you to our second installment of the series of Building a Better Us, Community Conversations for Systemic Thinkers. Networking events are designed to share, learn, and connect over conversations on challenging topics across the state of Washington, and giving us an opportunity for inspiration, support, continued education, and connection with our fellow Washington MFT community. I also want to remind everyone to register for our annual conference in September, Crisis Across the Lifespan. As the networking event coordinator and membership committee chair, I'm really excited about this new task force that we have. Like I said, Astrid and Rochelle, they really offer great energy and passion for our community. And so it's been a real pleasure to work with them and coordinate these events with them. So they've put in a lot of volunteer hours to create meaningful events for all of us. So I just want to thank them. So next, Rochelle's going to be reviewing some of the event etiquette, and then Astrid will tell us a little bit more about today's event.
Thanks, Billy. So just want to highlight a couple Zoom tips for folks that we noticed last time. The first is that you can change to the personal screen at any time that shows just who is speaking, so the speaker view. That is usually located in the upper right-hand corner. If you just take your mouse up to the top there, it should pop itself up. That can help make it easier to keep track of who's speaking versus trying to find everybody on the squares in front of you. And the last thing that we came up with was that, just so everyone knows, in the public chat, which will be running on the side, you can actually save that to your computer. And that way you can have all the resources that people put in there right away if you want them, and have access to them right after the event. So just know that that's down there. There's a file button down there, and you can save down there. Due to kind of our limited time frame this morning, we do ask that all questions be submitted through the chat feature, and then the three of us are monitoring that. And when we open the panel discussion up, we will start calling on people, or if we see a lot of people with the same question, we'll probably try to summarize that into one format. But we'll ask you to jump in there. Please don't hesitate to put questions in starting at the beginning, and then we'll bring those in later. The initial presentation we have, everyone will be kept on mute except for our panelists. And the intention for today is just for a community conversation around uncertainty this school year. And we want to provide the opportunity to connect, learn, and share in meaningful ways as system thinkers. And we want to thank you all for joining us today. Please don't forget to sign in. Billy's been posting over in the chat as people log on our sign-in form. Again, you can get a CE for today. Just sign in there, and we'll get back to you at the end of the event with the reviews and all the things we need to do to finish that up, but make sure you're signed in. Again, thanks for being with us today. And at this point, I'm going to ask Astrid to kick us off for Building a Better Us, Community Conversations for Systemic Thinkers, Schoolhouse Rock.
All right, so welcome to today's community conversation, Schoolhouse Rock, supporting families during this time of uncertainty in education. So many districts in Washington State are attempting to make the best decisions to prep students, staff, and families as we emerge closer to the start of the 2020 to 2021 school year. So through today's conversation, we hope to encourage all of us to engage more deeply in this topic, as well as gain more knowledge on how to keep moving forward, even in the uncertainty, you know? So we have assembled today's panelists to help all of us learn, share, and connect in meaningful ways as systemic thinkers. I would like to thank Elizabeth Gracier, Leslie Blevins, Nichelle Alderson, and Paul Gannon for participating as our panelists today. So our format today will begin with each of our panelists answering prepared questions, followed by an open question and answer session with questions submitted by you, our attendees, in the chat. So before we get to the questions, we would like to welcome the panelists and let each of them briefly introduce themselves. And we're going to begin with Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Liz Gracier. I have a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor. I work as a therapist at a Title I elementary school on Joint Base Lewis McChord. Prior to that, I lived in the great state of Texas, although I'm a Washingtonian, but I still have to say that. The Texan did get into my blood. And I've worked at everything from a Scott and White, which is similar to multi-care, in addition to working for nonprofit drug and alcohol. I also am an adjunct psychology professor at a small local Catholic university, teaching everything from social psychology, lifespan development. I am also a yoga teacher. I have my 200 RYT and I am working on my 300. That being stated, things that I'm passionate about related to that is both trauma, which also I'm seeing a lot more conversation in the schools and with lifespan development around that. And then also on culture and equity are a couple other things that I'm passionate about, and that is related to my full-time job and also in relation to yoga. So thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm going to shoot over Leslie.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Leslie Blevins. I'm a licensed psychologist and also a board certified behavior analyst at the doctoral level. I'm trained in school psychology, so that's what my doctoral program was focused in. And I'm also a former teacher through Teach for America. So I've had quite a few different experiences in schools. I've worked in schools across Louisiana, Georgia, Nebraska, and then only within private practice here in Washington. But I feel like it's a pretty broad perspective as far as the national view of school systems. I do neuropsychological evaluations for children, and then I also provide therapy, oftentimes working with the children's teachers and parents to help them to generalize their skills inside the school setting. And I'm happy to be here today.
Perfect. Nish. Oh, go ahead, Paul. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you for putting this together. My name is Nichelle Alderson. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I am in private practice here in Seattle. I'm also a certified functional nutritional therapist and certified life coach and some other things that are in the coaching areas. I do holistic mental wellness work, and so I have shifted my practice to focus on the wellness side of our well-being and the foundations of that through nutrition and the whole person, the whole self. So I have been in private practice here for about 10 years in Seattle on Beacon Hill. I primarily serve and work with communities of color that are adults in communities of color primarily. However, I'm recently beginning to offer nutrition classes that include youth and families. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you again for inviting me.
And Paul.
Hi, good morning. I'm in Spokane, Washington. Paul Gannon, and I am a father and husband first, and after that, I'm an educator. This will be my 25th year in public education. Like all of you, I believe in serving our community and finding out how to reach out and support each and every child and family. I've had the privilege of being both a teacher at the elementary level and then 13 years as a building principal in elementary. This is my Then I've worked in our district office serving kids and families using the AVID program, if any of you have heard of AVID before. It's all around great pedagogy and culture in schools to make sure every student and family has a voice, and giving kids tools so they can be college and career ready when they leave us after our K-12 system. So I've done that for 4 years at the central level, and then I'm venturing back this year back into an elementary school. So I started here at Brown Elementary about 3 months ago, and like all of you, really trying to be responsive to all of the different needs of both staff, students, and their families. And so like I said, this is my 4th elementary school that I've started up and run, but I can tell you already just the intensity and the amount of needs that we're seeing from families, from even being able to communicate with families to get them hooked up with the resources that they need in order to successfully start with parent conferences next week, and then students starting live with us online the following week. It's a little humbling to see, even as much as we're reaching out, just trying to, we're down to the every last phone call and trying to get kids hooked up. So super encouraged and and excited about a new year working with a new community. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel today. I know that I'm going to learn 40 times more than I have to share. So just the qualifications and the stories that the 4 or 3 other panelists have shared are pretty amazing. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's get into the first question. So starting with Liz, and then the rest of our panels will follow. What are you seeing in your work surrounding the educational uncertainty this year, Liz, so far?
So it's interesting. I'm starting my 8th year at my elementary school, which, as I mentioned, is Title I, and I'm in discussions already with a couple parents as well as some teachers, not students yet. So a few concerns or themes I'm seeing, of course, is health and wellness. And this is not related just to COVID-19 and the physical body, but also our mental wellness as far as anxiety, fear about going in the classroom. What will that look like? And also related to safety, which I believe we'll discuss later, is cultural identity and feeling safe in our current political environment and what is also taking place. Additionally, many of our educators, and I'm also noticing our parents, are feeling overwhelmed. I'm already seeing dialogue on email. The principal contacted me actually to discuss this. We're going to have some conversation about nonviolent communication. Sounds like a very simple concept, but even the way emails are taking place, and also going back to like the sleeping and the eating. Another thing, of course, and I believe we'll discuss this in a few moments, is equity, which Paul, you briefly mentioned already, balance of resources, food insecurity, people having issues with internet access, even if they are on Joint Base Lewis McChord. How many computers do you have? How many children are in the home? And as I mentioned as well, safety, both mental and physical. And then also for our teachers who are single parents, our teachers who are dual income and there's not, they're putting their children in daycare. And then of course, as briefly mentioned, online learning apps. I'm actually having an appointment with my nephew who's in 8th grade this weekend to talk to me. I work at St. Martin's University, and I return next week and I need some help with some of the fancy Zoom things. So he's gonna do FaceTime with me. So I'm being silly when I say that, but not so much. I know I'm talking to a lot of the teachers already and they don't know some of the apps, and the system they had last year, they dropped. Now they have a bunch of new apps and we start back on Wednesday. Same with the parents. Are they aware of these different resources? And as I mentioned, time. And then one more thing I want to mention too, because I don't want it all to be doom and gloom, is creativity. A couple of our teachers also engaged in art activities. I know right now we're providing telehealth services, mental health services, and there is at times greater collaboration and communication. I have had last spring, before when we went online, I had some parents reach out to me who told me that they wouldn't have reached out to me if it had been in person. And the fact that it was via a phone or via telehealth actually encouraged them to reach out. So there's those positives and negatives both with online. And those are my 4 main bullet points related to that. Thank you.
So are we just jumping in as we go then, Billy? Is that the, okay? So some things that align with what Elizabeth said, but also some differences. At the school level, usually you have your very, very eager teachers who start coming back in early August, and then others that follow. I would say this year, I had the fortune, usually when you change schools, you get to start like in July or something, and I had the fortune of starting really about the end of May because of the transition between the previous administrator and I. And since the time I started, teachers were already starting to gear up, like what's this gonna look like? And it really didn't stop this summer. Other than about a week that I was gone this summer for camping, really I've had teachers in the building just really trying to be ingenious about how they're going to approach this year, knowing that we were very likely going to start virtually, but really with all the uncertainty about whether or not that was going to be the platform or not. It's been about 3 weeks now ago in Spokane that we've known that we were going to start virtually instead of in person once some of the health things were put in place. But up to that, our teachers were, first of all, checking out their technology and really making it clear what they needed, helping each other, reaching out, even though we really weren't supposed to have more than a few people in the building, starting to get familiar with their Teams platform, which is what we're using in Spokane, and really taking taking care of each other as colleagues, and then starting to plan and reach out to our counselor and myself and our assistant principal about what families needed to be reached out with over the summer to kind of continue those check-ins with those families that they started in the spring. You know, our district has been trying to be really responsive with ongoing weekly webinars for staff and parents. And it's been an awesome thing, but at the same time, I think it's really adding to an intense level of stress and anxiety among staff that I've seen in particular this last week, because as much as you know, it unpacks more that you don't know. And teachers overall typically feel pretty confident about the way we've always gone about our business, but we know that that's not going to work in the digital platform, right? We have to engage more, have more breaks, more community building, more relationship building, and they want to do it well from day one because they know that our parents deserve the best, and they also know that really our crisis teaching from March to June just didn't cut it, and they know that our public will give us some grace, but that's going to run out pretty quickly. So they know that we've got to do it well right from the start, and with that, many teachers are also perfectionists, and they want to do it perfect from the beginning, which I know for me, I'm fairly type A, probably like a lot of other people on the call. And there's still a lot of uncertainty. You know, we know we're going to be at a distance now, and we're simultaneously trying to plan for what it's going to look like when we start rolling in kindergarten and first graders, hopefully, you know, in the soon future, and then soon after that, other grade levels. But not really knowing when that date's going to come, I think adds to the intense feelings of like, how is that going to look when we have to shift from really focusing on teaching online to then also knowing a little bit more comfort about how we go about teaching kids in person, but with the level of all the health things that we have to have in place and social distancing guidelines and how all of our specialists and people that aren't with us like all day long in a classroom, how they're going to interact with those classrooms. So it's added to that. And then the other side of that is parents have those same concerns. And so, you know, we've been fielding a lot of calls, one, to hook people up with resources, you know, getting them signed up for laptops, finding out how to get them access to high-speed internet. I have a family at my school that has 10 children, not all at my school, but they've got 10 children. And, you know, the best internet service is good for about 4 or 5 access points. And they're trying to figure out how to have all 10 of their kids live from, you know, 8:30 to 11:50 every morning with a teacher, because they care about their kids and they want what's best for them. And they want to do it well as well at the family side. So it's just trying to be creative and knowing that our first week, we're not going to get it right perfectly. And parents are going to want us to get as close as possible, but knowing they're going to give us grace, and then figuring out how we're going to reach out to each and every one of those families now, but also after, you know, some things don't work, and continue to chip away at that to get every student to have access. It's humbling, but knowing that we've got a great community and a great staff that's going to help us do that. But we're going to really be counting on our local community advocates for kids to hook them up with resources, and also our counselors to do probably a lot of intense work with kids that have been in trauma for a variety of reasons, like, you know, some of the things that have been mentioned around food insecurity and lack of childcare, lack of access to technology, you know, people that have lost their jobs and they don't know where they're going to work and earn for their family. All of those things have been compounded during the last 5 or 6 months. So it's going to be an awesome year, but it's going to be super challenging as well. But we've got the right people on the bus. We just have to look at it differently.
Right, definitely. I want to get Leslie and Nichelle in here too. What do you guys, whoever would like to jump in, what are you guys seeing at around this time, Leslie?
You know, I really align with what Paul is saying. From, you know, I mostly work with parents. Sometimes though, teachers are coming in to see me in private practice as parents. And the past several weeks, as I'm talking to families about starting up with school, I feel like we're really talking about having a flexible mindset. And the things that I really love about what Paul said is that teachers are planning to be more creative in how they're delivering instruction, giving more breaks, being more engaging, because I feel like that's what parents are really telling me, is that having a kid sit in front of a computer for 6 hours a day, they're going to have to literally sit behind their child and hold their head facing the screen. And I think that's just logical, right? All adults know that that's going to be really hard for a kid. And I think all adults know that we're going to have to be flexible right now and extend grace to the school system as they figure out ways that they can do something they've never done before. And I think that creates a lot of anxiety for parents. The second thing that I would add is, of course, I'm working with children who have special needs. And that is especially anxiety inducing for the parents, because in the past, their kids already just in, the formal normal schooling were having difficulties. They would have to push and advocate to get little changes back then because things weren't always working for their kid. And so now they're in a situation where they're like, wow, I don't know how this is going to work for my kid now. Not all parents. Some kids actually thrived during crisis schooling because the social stressors were removed, and maybe that was where their difficulties lied. But for some children, ADHD and attentive type or other types of disabilities, those children will have exacerbated difficulties.
So good. Nichelle, what are you seeing in your work?
I feel like, a lot of the things have been touched on. I work primarily with the parents, right, as clients, and the administrators, some of the teachers. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of the overwhelm and the stress, especially from those who are the perfectionists. They're, sleep is a challenge. Stress eating is a challenge. I'm seeing the frustrations at the things that, are supposed to align, but they don't, right? And so the mishaps and the frustrations that come with that, the time management challenges, some of the systemic things within the family structure. So having the space, having adequate space, enough space for all who are needing to be focused on online. And then what I'm seeing the most in terms of and the newer types of stressors is just being zoomed out, right? Just being literally exhausted from being in front of a Zoom screen for so many hours of the day outside of the classroom. So in addition to that, then there's the work schedule and then the meetings for this and the other things, and then hopefully some time for catch up with family. And so as a result, I think that we're seeing some isolations. We're seeing some of the similar, impacts that we would expect with other forms of change. So the anxieties, the depressions, the just loss of balance, work-life balance, and really utilizing so much of available time to try and produce and overproduce. And so I'm seeing the exhaustion of that showing up on especially the administrative staff and the teams of folks that I see in the classes that I teach.
So good. Thank you for sharing that. And it's clear, with what all our panelists was talking about, there's a lot of stressors going on, right? And so the next question, I want to kick it over to you, Leslie. How can someone balance the stressors of school at home while trying to show up in other responsibilities?
So I think we've already started to kind of hit on this a little bit. Unfortunately, there are constraints that are happening in each individual family that for the most part we just can't control. And I think recognizing that and giving yourself grace as a parent in these situations is really important, because going back to Nichelle, what she's saying, if we're going to be perfectionists and expect to be able to be the homeschool teacher and be the worker who's producing at the levels we used to produce, you're probably setting yourself up to fail with those goals. And you're also setting yourself up for a lot of stress-related behaviors and not feeling very good. And so one is just recognizing the situation that you're in. With that said, I really think an unintended consequence of the pandemic, the pandemic is awful. None of us want that to have happened, but it is happening. I think an unintended consequence is that it's forced all of us to reevaluate how we're living our lives. And for education in general, I know that the way that I have been viewing it and really working with my clients is to step back and think about the purpose of it, the value of it. And I know last year during crisis homeschooling, parents would get so upset if their kid couldn't get every single problem right on a worksheet that was sent home. And again, that goes back to perfectionism, or just the expectation that, you know, well, if a worksheet was sent home, my kid should have been able to do it. Like, so sort of these mindsets of things should feel easy or as easy as they did before. And maybe the purpose of education is something that we should focus on. Maybe it's about having a growth mindset that I'm going to try something new. I'm going to be creative in problem solving. I'm going to be collaborative. Maybe that's a goal that we should look at going forward, where I collaborate, or I learn how to ask for help, or I learn how to identify what I need help with. All of those types of values are things that I know that employers want in their workforce. And for many education systems, that's their goal with education, is to raise children who are critical thinkers, who are creative, who are kind, who can work with other people. We're raising humans. And so I really think our education system, again, from an unfortunate pandemic, is now in a situation where we're getting to that bare bones. Why are we doing education? Maybe that's what we focus on. Maybe we let go of, did the kid write their name exactly right on the paper whenever they turned it in? That kind of stuff is really frustrating, especially for kids whenever they're sitting in front of a Zoom, computer for 6 hours a day. I think we're going to have to let that stuff go. And then for parents who are doing two different roles, I think for them, sitting back and reflecting on those primary values that they're going to have this school year, and letting go of some of the overachiever goals, that's going to help them to really play those multiple roles. With that said, I would say the second thing is really getting those primary needs met. And I believe, Liz, that you kind of hit on this before as well. Sleep, eating, exercise, especially for children. Exercise is the one thing that we have that works to support, help, fix, whatever you want to say, every single stressor or mental health illness out there. And so I think that I'm hoping, I don't know that schools are going to do this across the board. Paul, you did mention that we're going to be having more breaks, which I love, love, love. And I'm encouraging all parents to ask for this for their children. But I think exercise breaks are going to be 100% essential for every single child out there, not just the children with ADHD, not just the children who are, I don't know, whatever thing they might have going on with them, but every single child this year. It's just going to be essential. And schools facilitating it is probably going to be essential so that parents understand how important it is. So meeting those primary biological needs and also paying attention to your primary values for education, as opposed to meeting perfectionistic goals. Those are the two things that I think are going to help managing stressors.
So good. So good.
Yeah, and I'd say our number one focus is twofold. One, that it's all about self-care, which feeds into what you were just saying, Leslie, that really encouraging that with staff right now. And so if we're not taking care of ourselves through exercise, diet, sleep, we're not going to be able to take good care of our kids and our families. And so trying to model that, which I haven't been great at this week, working 14-hour days, as Nicole pointed out, like that intensity. But I know that that's going to level off for me because I've been through the job. But for our teachers that are doing something brand new, or that are new teachers, or parents that have never done this at home, I think helping them see through what we're offering kids, like this is what it means when we say it's lunchtime and it's time for your kids to play, giving them ideas and saying, here are some things you should try, and then modeling that when we come back to school in 2 months or 3 months or whenever it is, that when we take breaks, it's not just go out and stand in a yard, it's literally having some organized or unorganized games that kids can choose or not choose from. Within the constraints, that's going to be the challenge, right? The rub is that trying to get kids to play, but knowing that we're still going to have to socially distance at least cohorts of groups so that we're not, intermixing too much. I think the second thing, like I know our district has a heavy focus on social emotional learning with a new, I don't know if any of you have heard of Character Strong and Purposeful People. We have a renewed goal straight from the superintendent down around making sure that every morning opens up that way, and all day we're weaving in opportunities for kids to build relationships, find out about themselves and each other, really building a sense of empathy, not sympathy for others, but really understanding and walking in other people's shoes and modeling that. And also, like, it has built-in pieces around character dares as a school and for families to try things out that their kids are learning at school with their teacher. So we're trying to build that out into the community too. Because if we don't take care of those things, it doesn't matter what we teach. And touching on another thing Leslie said, I think one thing I've seen this past couple months as parents have called me, I've had a much higher number of parents that are saying, should we be retaining my child? They're behind. And it's like, hold on, everyone's coming in feeling that way. Every student just lost basically 3 formal months, but 5 connected months of time with set reading, math, writing, all of those things, and knowing that we're going to have to re-level our norms, right? We've gotten so crazy and out of control as a society, saying that every kid at this point in time should be at this point in their learning around whatever content it is. And as a system, we're really focusing on now knowing that we're going to have a limited amount of time with our kids in each day, and building in social emotional work. We're going to have a limited number of standards per se, or key pieces we want to get across the kids each day. So really saying, what are the most important things, and cutting through some of the other crap, excuse my French, of things that we're filling time with or demanding kids learn, to get at the soul of what they need to learn, and doing it more through project-based things that they can carry on with their families or individually or from community help, and really focus on those things. And I think that the silver lining of all of this is that when we come back together and we're back to school in person, that the longer this goes, actually, the side effect, the positive side effect will be, we are going to be forced to totally redo how we go about school and get rid of some of the notions of how we've always done it, because they're just not working for us in this format, right? And hopefully then we have the capacity and the desire when we come back to say, we don't want to go back to the way we used to do it. We want to do it this different way. And now we can do it better than we were in person, and build in more playtime, and build in more connection to families, and build in time for kids to interact and learn with one another. So, that's really what I'm hoping comes out of this, with all the challenges.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Nichelle, I really want to hear your thoughts about the nutrition part too, and then, Liz afterwards.
Yeah. I think when we think about the biological level, I really get into what's actually going into the body and how is it being processed, and what's happening with that. And what I noticed, kind of as a byproduct of just receiving things that were, so as a parent, what I noticed, the things that would come in the grocery bags that were delivered when there were things that were being offered to the students. I was really surprised in the beginning at the boxed Kraft macaroni and cheese, and the, canned syrup of peaches, and lots of those kinds of things. The high fructose corn syrup and this and that and the other, really surprised me at the lack of forethought about the ingredients and the quality of the nutrients that are being offered and given. And I wasn't sure if it was just happening in maybe the lower income neighborhoods that like I live in, or if it was across the board. But over time, what I noticed for my own family was a shift in the things that we wouldn't typically have in our home. There was a bringing in of supports that were absolutely not helpful. They, definitely contributed to some of the spiraling downs of things by adding in the glutinous things that, there were all these treats, Texas donut thingies and all these kind of things that I wouldn't purchase, because I'm aware of how that impacts my family. And so it makes me think about the lack of education around the importance of eliminating some of the things that are causing or contributing the problems when it comes to the anxiety that's on the biological level, what's happening, the trembling inside, or the stressors that add to the ADD and symptoms. From the dyes, from the dairies, all of these things that may be inadvertently causing or contributing to the problems that we're seeing, and trying then to resolve. So I think that there's an importance of bringing bringing nutrition back into the conversation about how we can teach families and teachers and administrators to better support ourselves, because those of us who are doing the work are needing this information and this knowledge as well, but how we can give that to the students so that they can take care of themselves on that level. But one other thing that is not nutrition related that I want to kind of bring to this conversation around the stressors and managing that is the social stressors, the social media, all of the news, everything that's trickling in from multiple sources, and what's actually the content of that. And for some communities, especially Black and Brown communities, there are heightened stressors that are not always acknowledged in places. In schools. And so it becomes this sense of what I'm hearing from clients especially is it's this sense of business as usual, even though the shooting just happened last night. And for our community, it's a big deal. And so it brings that, as we're being creative about the ways that we teach differently, what our expectations are of each other and of the students, I think it also begs for us to think differently about the way that we address what's going on socially and in our world, and how we bring that delicately and eloquently to the table, and acknowledge that as a part of the very real stressors that are sometimes in between the learning.
Right. Thank you. Liz, anything you would like to add?
I'll just briefly, and I'm not trying to be silly. So when we're talking about the stressors, I have my dog on my lap. He's going to be 15 actually this week. And it seems silly, but when we're talking about balancing, I'm aware that I hide him, but I also use him as a tool because he's got kidney disease. So students have enjoyed seeing him. And I'm like, here's Riley. Even in my college classes, I teach 2 nights a week and I have students put their dogs on. So it's been a way to build. They would have never seen the side of me, this dog, but they love to see Riley. They want to wave to him, and they also want to know how he's doing. I don't share his health issue. And I want to respond with what Nichelle said too. I am also, as I mentioned, a yoga teacher. And one thing, and I know for adults, I do teach some trauma aware for the 200 RYTs. I have a training coming up, is top down versus bottom up. And you've probably heard about that. So I expect somebody to talk, right, about how they're feeling. A lot of times I know for myself when I've had issues going on, I'm not ready to talk. I'm quiet, I withdraw. The media, as you mentioned, Nichelle, it's been extremely negative. You can replay these videos, these horrific videos, and see over and over again what's been going on systemically. And to not have a reaction to that, and we can talk about that more in a little bit, but to see primarily white faces in education. And what I'm going with that is versus bottom up, which is yoga, art, music, other ways. And sometimes if we're able to engage in different forms to express and to feel, I mean, I literally feel like I use yoga to work out trauma in my body when I'm not ready. And Bessel van der Kolk, you guys are probably aware of him, frequently talks about this with the VA system. But a lot of times when I'm not ready to talk about something, I literally put an intention into my yoga. And I teach yoga, which with the 5th graders, and I also had a little yoga group at my school with Title I. And there were no, by the way, I know I'm a Caucasian female teaching yoga. There were no white students in the class. And I really felt a level of, what I want to say, I feel like there was a lot of trust given to me to have boys that were non-white in that class. And again, that is a way that they learned to deal with some of their stressors. And right now I'm going to have to be trying to do that via telehealth, and it's not quite the same as being together. And plus I also provided all the resources. So anyway, I practice yoga. I teach yoga at the school to students with a consent form, to parents who are soldiers as well, and done some of that trauma aware yoga. So I just wanted to mention that we're expecting people sometimes to talk about how they feel, and we're not ready to talk about our stressors. We have to work them out in different ways. Thanks.
So good. So Nichelle, the next question, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about the grieving process that is going on for everyone with this non-traditional year, like the loss of the usual experience or loss of loved ones or
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're seeing loss in so many different ways, right? And if you start with the big one, not all of us have lost someone close to us, but we probably all at this point know someone who has lost someone. And so just the extension of remembering that the grief is extending through the community, through the family, through the friendships, through these relationships, as we are supporters, as we are, you know, the shoulder to cry on, the listening ear. There's different ways that people are experiencing their grief. It's it's counter transferring sometimes. It's transferring throughout the community just from the knowledge and the awareness of what's happening. With the protests, with COVID, with the pandemic. But also I think one of the big things that we have collectively lost, that we are collectively grieving, excuse me, that is my reminder of my time, is the loss of routine and normalcy, you know, and how much we once relied upon that, and that we're going through that process of, you know, surviving that, the same kind of grief process that we would if we were, you know, discussing death, right? There's the initial loss and you know, surviving the loss itself, moving through the healing and what that may look like. And I think that we are, as a society, moving through that process too. And as we look at the growth aspect and opportunities of that now, I think that we have an opportunity to really shift our thinking around the grief process and utilize the growth within that right now, with that creativity, with our imagination around what can be, what can come of this from here, from what we've learned, in all of those ways, in our routines, with our loss, with the way that we honor our loved ones as they are lost, with the way that we support one another, but definitely making sure that we're considering the frontline workers and how the impacts of holding that weight is impacting them as well. So thinking about widening the community to include the helpers as those who are being helped through the entire collective grief process. Since I don't work directly in the schools, and most of the work that I do is with individuals and small groups and classes. My work isn't specifically focused on grief and loss, but it definitely has come into my office more and more and more over the past 6 months. And, you know, I think that what folks come to me and say the most is their loss of sense of balance, right? Their loss of sense of control over the what's coming, what's to, this unexpectedness of, you know, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We don't know what's going to happen next cold and flu season that's upon us, these unknowns. And some of what I've been offering as a support is to stay in the present and manage what we can with that. It felt like honestly, it felt like such a spinning wheels, almost waste of time to be back in June and July having conversations about what was going to happen in September, because we didn't have enough information at that time. And it did have a sense of like busy work associated to it. Keep everyone busy so that we can justify why we're paying them, right? But without enough information, we were making crazy making, right? People were anxious around us. We were adding to the anxieties by attempting to over-prepare. So I think that as part of the process, we collectively can move into that growth process of loss, and look for the missing links, look for the gaps that we can begin to fill in our personal spaces, because that's where we're going to notice them the most.
Okay. I do want to honor your time, Nichelle, and I will let the other panelists give their answers for that question. I did want to ask you before you leave, another topic that we were going to talk about regarding like a discussion about systemic racism and like the impacts it will have during the school year. Is there any advice that you can give in ways that we can support families in communicating around this topic regarding systemic racism within schools before you leave?
Yeah. You know, I would say that we definitely have got to be transparent about it, right? And some of the things that we are seeing, even, you know, demonstrated in this room, right, is a fairly lack of diversity around the faces that we see. And it's a very visual space on Zoom. And so, as Liz mentioned earlier, just calling out the fact that, yeah, I'm a white yoga teacher with all POC students, right? What that may look like and feel like for that group that is not represented, or that is not represented in a space of power, in positions of power. So what that equity and inequity looks like and feels like, I think that we need to be willing to call it out and be transparent about it from all of the angles, so that it's no longer this elephant in the room that we pretend like we don't notice, because half of the room notices, right? And so I think that would be one aspect of it. Another is really monitoring, again, the amount of intake that we bring in. So I often talk about, you know, food, but I'm not always talking about what goes in the mouth. I'm also talking about like what we're looking at, what information we are feeding ourselves, listening to, you know, who we are surrounding ourselves with, what, you know, conversations we engage in, so that we're also putting up protections and boundaries around the amount of intake that we take in, that could be toxic and overloading and overwhelming, and in those ways, and really unnerving because it's unknown, right? It's what's going to happen is unknown, and so transparency and, you know, some boundaries around the intake, I think, are going to be really important.
So good. I just want to say thank you for joining us on this panel. I know you have to dip out, but safe travels, and we look forward to talking with you in the future.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, I'm going to go back to the previous question in regards to what we started off with, Nichelle. So I'll go with you, Paul. Can you talk about the grieving process that is going on for everyone with this non-traditional year in the loss of that?
You know, in the spring, not being in a direct school, but having kids of my own in high school and watching some of their peers and then community members and things like that, family members that were experiencing a lot of loss around some of the traditions that come with a typical school year. You know, really encouraging, one, for people to share that grief. I think giving people an outlet and a venue that they can share why they're upset, what they're missing, and then for people to actually be part of the solution making. You know, how are we going to re-envision those types of traditions and activities for our students? For example, around like high school graduation last spring, you know, like the high school my kids go to, North Central in Spokane, you know, they really made it a party for their kids, and they did it out of their parking lot, but every family got to come, and it wasn't just like hey, you get 2 minutes, but man, they invited families, and they had cheering sections, and all the staff were there, and they really made it an event. In fact, I talked to a few families that said, I hope we never go back, because yeah, the others were formal, but some things our families didn't have to worry about was they didn't all have to come in their Sunday best. They got to be surrounded by the people they love. They got to invite more than those 3 people that got tickets to the arena. You know, some of those constraints that we have in place in a typical situation for, you know, white middle class families that you know, they know how to navigate the system maybe better, or they have more resources to plug into those things. Sometimes those things get in the way, right? And I think going into this year as a school, we're looking at, you know, yes, we're not going to run our assemblies or awards, those things the same, but we have to re-envision those special moments for our kids just like they had before. So, you know, talking from all the way from how our whole recognition program for kids, how are we going to do that both virtually And then how is that going to connect so that we may be doing it virtually, but we should still connect to kids to our physical space here at school so they can see these things developing in the background of teachers who are working from our classrooms, and figuring out ways to post and recognize all kids in the public spaces of like our school website, through our Facebook pages, so that kids still get recognition for showing great acts of character and kindness and respect and all of those things that we want kids to grow up and emulate. So it's not that we can't celebrate and have these special moments, they're just going to look different. And being okay that we're going to grieve for some of those things that aren't the same, that some families are like, I've had my kid at your school for 8 years and my other kids got to do blah, blah, and blah, and now they're going to miss out on that. Well, what can we do that's going to be equally as special for your family, and making that good? So.
Loving it. Leslie, Liz, anybody could jump in, but what would you like to add?
So I kind of have a thought that mixes the grief and then that other question that you asked about going into just our cultural shift that we've much needed, listening to people of color. And I've just noticed in myself as a provider that this is a grief process that I feel like it's empathy for people of color and their grief that I am experiencing. And in each of my sessions, supporting the families that I work with as they're processing it, I think that it's something that's pretty hard because it's so many layers. It's like this empathetic grief experience as a white person that I'm experiencing. And then on top of that, I do have some people of color that I provide services to as clients. And then I have white families. And so there's all these different layers. And so I feel like going back to the experience of grief, I think just as mental health practitioners, we have to really take care of ourselves and really work on our own grief process and our own self-care so that we can be there for our clients and be there for especially the children who might be our clients, and helping them to process their grief, and helping our white clients to learn ways to be supportive of the clients who are people of color, or not just clients, but just the community. Learning new ways to be there and be supportive and listen. And I think it's just been it's like so many different roles at the same time, because I can feel outrage and I can feel, outrage, but I'm also having to feel empathetic, and it's just so many layers. I have found it very complex over these last few months. And I don't know if maybe other mental health providers have also found it complex. The way I have found it complex, it's kind of overwhelming. I know I've had to just stay off social media sometimes for days at a time because I'm just exhausted and I have to just like sleep. And I imagine it's nothing compared to what people of color experience, especially with how much it's talked about recently. It just feels overwhelming sometimes. And so I feel like there's a level of self-care there that's super high right now for us to be able to do our jobs.
Awesome. Liz, anything you want to add on?
Just briefly, I'm actually teaching a class on grief this fall, and I always tell people it's not something you want to get into. It's usually something that is because of what happens to you. And to also realize there's compounded grief. I do run a grief course, and actually my mom died 6 years ago this Sunday, and I'm going to go on a hike up to Mailbox Peak. But remembering that this is also happening to our students. So it's not just related to the grief of like a physical body, but maybe I would have gotten together with my siblings like I do. So these traditions, and I think Paul, you kind of mentioned that, these traditions and different things that we do are now not here, and also honoring the cultural diversity of other people who have this loss and grief. And I will say, I like that it was named as grief. Grief is a dirty word in our culture. I won't get on a tangent about that, but I'm teaching about that this fall in America. You do not talk about grief. You don't talk about loss. And there's a whole aspect about that, terror management theory and different terms that are being used and why in our culture we don't like to discuss or even talk about grief, whether it's a physical loss or the loss of a job, the loss of physical ability, those types of things. But I'll keep it short. Thanks.
So good. So the next question, I'm going to move on. Paul, I'm going to start with you, okay? So going back to the question that I asked Nichelle before she left. So the discussion regarding systemic racism and like the impacts that it will have on this school year, like with equality, accountability, access to resources. We talked a little about that. So what are ways we can support families in communication around this topic about systemic racism and how it will impact the school year?
Yeah, I think as an educator who's been in Spokane my whole life, any of you that know Spokane, it's fairly light colored overall as a population. And I think it's just now that some of our community leaders outside of our communities of color are finally starting to listen and recognize especially through some of the current events, that it's time that we listen and not talk as much. Our school board, for example, has a new resolution around this exact topic in response to all the things that are going on. And it's really a focus around, yes, doing the traditional things that I think predominantly white systems have done when things happen and they're forced to it around, okay, we need to do more reading, we need to do book studies, we need to do that. And those things are still happening because we need to inform our own biases and figure out how we're going to attack some of those things that we personally need to do. But it's really around reaching out, finding time to listen, empathize, and find solutions that are going to meet the needs of our students and their families. I think about, like you talked about resources, it's about not waiting for families to reach out to us and say, this is what we need to plug in and be successful, but us doing the hard work, right? And reaching out to them saying, I noticed that you haven't responded, without judgment, saying, what can we do better to make sure that we meet your needs? Is it a financial thing? Is it a time thing? Is it a you aren't getting the information thing, because not all of our systems are perfect to reach out to our various communities. I think about, like, our district is also looking at how we repurpose resources, like basically our police officers, they're commissioned officers that were working in our system, and looking at the disproportionality in our discipline data, in particular around the arrest and interventions of our CRO officers and how they interacted with students, in particular our students of color, and really moving away from that model. And it's not because we don't think that sometimes behaviors happen, but that's true for all of our students, right? Why is there a disproportionality with our students of color? And so recognizing that something's broken in our system, and how are we going to use those same resources to actually listen differently, respond differently, and, like, at all of our individual schools, re-looking at our discipline policies and how we're using restorative practices differently, how we are training our teachers to listen and work with individual kids to be responsive versus reactive. I think as we get at that, then our families of color are going to want to engage with us differently. They're going to see us actually putting in the effort and the time and that's going to build that trust. If we don't show good faith in what we're doing, why would families of color want to reach out and say, why would they even have faith that we would try something differently, right? Unless we're showing that we're doing things to do that. In response, I think that's probably, and I'm not an expert in this field, obviously. I stammer through my words, and I'm just one white dude trying to figure out how this works well for my school community and for the students I serve, and knowing that I don't have all the answers, and recognizing that every day, even the more reading I do, I still have biases that I got to keep in check and try to figure out why I've got them so that I can serve my kids better. I think or someone mentioned, I think it was Elizabeth, said our predominant teachers across the nation, but even in our own community, we're like 80 to 90% white, probably 70% female. And we know how to do what we've always done, but it's not working for a large number of our kids and families. And so calling the BS sometimes and having them say, no, that wasn't necessarily behavior. That was actually your response to ramping that kid up because they weren't doing what you wanted them to do at that moment, and then helping them unpack those situations and figure out what we can do differently the next time. And knowing that we're going to make mistakes, and then saying, we blew that one, family. We want to hear from you what we can do differently. We got to do more listening and less talking from authority, from a position of authority.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
So in my private practice, I have a weekly vlog that I put out, and I try to cover issues that are relevant that parents might, care about in the moment, those kinds of things. And whenever the racial injustices started becoming prominent, I spoke about that. And of course, I started getting commentary back from people in the local community. And what I started to learn that was so interesting was, because I'm coming from a place of privilege, it was like this portion of the world, I had never even seen it before. And so it's so interesting, because really listening to people of color, you start to see little things that you just weren't aware of before. And so it's like you're seeing more of the world. But even more than that, I was really thankful, because a local practitioner, she's a BCBA of color, she's a person of color too. And just having some dialogue with her, I really started to realize in the autistic community, there is a culture there as well, where they feel like they're invisible, their perspectives aren't heard either. And so I feel like I've been on this journey for the past several months of just really understanding, not coming at people like I'm a professional, but coming at people with a true, or attempting to come at people as with a true desire to understand their point of view in their life, so that I can in some way use the professional knowledge I've gained to support them with recommendations that meet their goals, their values, their needs. And so I don't even know what the original question was, but I'm just saying that I feel like that's kind of a goal that I've strived. That's a big change in my worldview, I think, is that just I felt like I was blind to it, and I didn't know I was blind to it. You know what I mean? It's like a new dimension. And I think maybe going into this school year, I had an amazing conversation with an assistant principal, where he had a conversation with his school staff, and just understanding that with some of the children of color, that they would often get reprimanded more often for calling out answers, which is a really common thing for teachers to reprimand students for. But a teacher of color had pointed out to them that whenever the people of color go to church on the weekends, they have a call and response style at church. So for them, that is culturally appropriate. That's them showing respect. They're being attentive, engaged. And so for them, it's a cultural mismatch. That child might be totally engaged in trying their best in school, and they just got reprimanded for it. And so understanding that coming from a more dominant white culture, we might not be seeing the full picture. Just understanding that, and understanding that we're learning about someone's culture so that we can best engage them, not assuming ever that somebody's doing their worst intention, right? Always assuming they're doing their best intentions in a moment, and just coming at it with understanding, or trying to build your understanding. I feel like that's what I've really been learning over these last few months. And as a behaviorist, the big part of my ethics is to never punish, right? Never, ever, ever punish. And I feel like that's what I've really learned, is that maybe there's this tendency to automatically punish instead of to build understanding. And I feel like it's been operationalized a lot more for me recently. That's all I got.
Good. That's good. That is actually really good. I appreciate that. Liz?
Yes, I could speak on this for quite a while. The Department of Defense actually put together a group to deal with equity issues. And as I mentioned, this is also something that I've been greatly involved in with yoga. So one thing I just want to mention, of course, is advocacy, and also remembering that where a student lives based on socioeconomic status. Race frequently determines where they go to school. So this continues to be a segregation of sorts in the United States. And then also, as we talked about, many of our teachers are white. And so if you are white, like you were talking about, Paul, listening, understanding, trying to learn, and then also remembering too that, you know, we might be able-bodied, have cars, but also those students that were mentioned with 504s and IEPs, and having a sense of cultural sensitivity. And I'm also going to mention curriculum. Cultural competence related to curriculum. When I teach, I frequently mention, for example, I want to say Freud, you know, I'll just, without it being always overt, I'll say, you know, born in Switzerland, you know, 1896, white male. When we look at the books that we're reading, even in psychology, when I'm teaching college classes, we need to look at where this dominant culture is coming from. And if your culture is not represented, what is that saying? So I also want to mention too, this type of learning about race, culture, equity is not in an hour. I know we may have to take an hour or two long training. This is something that we need to continue to learn, especially if we are white. And so rather than it being a month or a day, and if your classroom does not provide resources that show that we have varied authors and those types of things, making sure that we integrate that in. And as you also mentioned, race and discipline, I did teach a criminal justice and mental health class. There is also that school to prison pipeline. So talking about the disparity with the way that we reprimand and discuss our youth. And I also want to encourage people to question. And I know that there's been questions even with staff about things like black hair. There's a difference between questioning and wanting to know the information, and then there's a difference when it may come across incorrectly. And so also realizing if you do have a question about somebody's hair or the way somebody does something, that even the way that we address that issue is so key versus, you know, making a lot of assumptions. And I also want to mention impact rather than intention. So rather, even if it's an accident and it's unintended, what I have done, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. Just say you're sorry. That's something that we talk about a lot in yoga. And I'm going to go ahead and go there too. We do a lot, and this is something that I'm seeing more of, and I don't think it's done as much in the other communities, but is land acknowledgement. So I reside in Steilacoom, and so we frequently in yoga classes acknowledge the land that I'm on and the people whose land that we took. And not just saying it, but thinking about that and thinking about the land and the people and what they may have done here. And so again, these are small things that are integrated, and I would like to see that more in other avenues besides yoga even. But the land acknowledgement, at first, I'll be honest, when I first started doing that, I thought, okay, it actually has been a really wonderful process for me. So I think these are the types of things that we need to continue to discuss, especially in our political environment when people, and I'm just going to say it, this week I heard somebody say that there's no such thing as racism in America. I almost choked. So I will stop at that. I could go on and on and on about this issue, but I'm taking a class practicing justice in yoga, and these types of things are not, it's not just with school, it's in every avenue, and it seeps into our system in every way, systemic racism. Thank you.
Yes. So I'm hearing, you know, communication. I'm loving everything that y'all are saying, the panelists, and I want to kick it over to Rochelle so we can start our question and answers from our attendees, because I want to also honor any of the questions that they have for you panelists. So go ahead, Rochelle.
There we go. I got booted right before we came in here. Okay. So thank you again so much, all the panelists. We have some questions rolling in. So I am just going to jump right in with Deidre. And if you are asking a question, if you wouldn't mind turning on your video, if you feel comfortable with that, we would appreciate it. We do want to connect with everyone here. But Deidre, can we start off with you, please?
Sure. So this is an amazing discussion. I'm having so many thoughts and feelings. but one that came up with the role that I'm in. I'm actually a mental health therapist in the public school system here in Spokane, Washington. I feel really fortunate to have that role. And I wanted to ask a little more detail kind of between what Paul was talking about and what Leslie was mentioning. When Leslie mentioned this idea of, letting the perfect handwriting go, that was such a great comment. And it reminded me of how the reality is that teachers have academic standards that they're expected to meet. They're kind of working off these check boxes, where I get the privilege of thinking more holistically. So I was wondering, specifically, maybe Paul, you're a little more in the position to talk about how do the academic standards sometimes create conflict with like the growth mindset, or seeing the person holistically and letting some of those things go. And specifically, how can I be mindful of how to support teachers, because they're going to be maybe experiencing frustration, and maybe also families. School is about how do you get a job, how do you meet those standards. So where can my thinking be with helping them?
Yeah, the rub is always between where we think kids should be and how close they are to getting there, right? And so, the way I've historically led, and I think many of my colleagues, and I think our system has changed a little bit to this recently, that yes, we have standards and they tell us our roadmap, but it's really about where did the students start with you that year, and how much growth and how do you support them for that year. And knowing that if we have a room of 17 of us right now, roughly there's going to be a third or a half, or maybe even more, depending on the school you're starting in, based on your life experiences and opportunities, that kids come in different places. And have an arbitrary mark at the end of kindergarten to say all kids will have all of these skills. Okay, that's fine to say that is the goal. Of course, we want all kids to have the same opportunities and the same strengths coming out of our system at the end. But if we can provide the opportunities for kids every day and the supports when needed. So let's say I'm the student that isn't meeting those standards by the middle of first grade. My job, along with my teachers' jobs, is to identify, okay, what do we have in place that we can provide those kids an extra layer or an extra touch during their school day. And that's where our reading and math interventionists come in. That's where our coaches come in to see if it's an instructional practice from our teachers. Maybe it's just a lack of knowing about how to reach those particular kids in a different way. It's reaching out to parents to find out what they need at home to provide them extra help and support outside the day. Because my belief is that all parents want to do great things for kids. Sometimes they just don't have the background or knowledge, or they're so busy doing 3 jobs, that they can't be there for their child at that moment at night. And so it's taking away those assumptions and figuring out what can we do to reach out and help provide those extra layers of support. Knowing that, let's say I started first grade because I didn't have 3 years of preschool like some of my classmates. And so I made great gains in kindergarten, but I'm still behind, and I start first grade behind. Okay, well, am I making at least a year's growth? Maybe I'm not to the end of the first grade standard, but how do I make a year's growth through the tier 1 supports that I'm getting from my regular classroom teacher? And then what are the tier 2 approaches that I'm getting from interventionists? For some students, when there's an identified disabling condition, or eligibility category, how do we use those resources to provide supports too? And then also using our counselors and MTSS supports and family therapists to reach out to community resources to say, what else is available outside the schoolhouse to support families? Maybe it's finding resources so the parent only has to work 2 jobs so they can support their children differently. Maybe it's, finding out how, rather than going to their uncle's house for childcare, it's connecting them to some services through our Express After School Care program or to the YMCA so they get some additional life experiences or tutoring experiences. So I think it's fine-tuning it for each individual child. That's really the hard part, right? Is that every family situation and every child is unique. That one size is not going to fit all. So, but that all of the things I just mentioned take a lot of time and effort, right? And so starting with making sure our staff have the belief system that all kids can succeed if provided the right supports. And not all staff, honestly, I don't know my stuff well enough here yet. From what I see, they're awesome. But, you know, how do we help each and every one of our staff members believe in every child? You know, sometimes you'll hear teachers describe kids as the naughty kid, or that kid is like sweet and low, or, you know, something like that, that they don't necessarily mean as a negative, but it comes across as really derogatory, right? Really off-putting. And so changing the language we use about kids, changing the way we discuss kids, both in private as professionals and also with their families. And coming from it, these are the things your kids do really well. What are you noticing as well? And then how can we celebrate those? And then what are the things they're challenged with at this moment? And then how are we going to get them the supports and the extra attention to grow in those areas? I mean, every kid is unique, and they're not all going to end any particular year or learning cycle in the same place as each other. But if we can measure it in small baby chunks along the way and identify when it's not working, and let's stop beating the dead horse if an intervention's not working, and change course, right? What is going to work? So it's those regular ongoing checkups to find out what are we going to try next. And you know, some kids are a puzzle, and sometimes we don't see the benefits and the fruits of our labor until 3 or 4 years later. It finally kicks in, and Paul suddenly, who was behind, he suddenly has a teacher that has 500 times the heart as their first grade teacher had for him. Or finally something clicked with the way they're learning, or finally maybe the parent finally has to only work one job because they had some support out there that now they can focus a little bit more time, because now they're afforded that time. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but those are my 3.5 cents.
I'd like to follow up on what Paul's saying, and to go back to something Deidre said with how do you combine or compare the growth mindset to the standards teachers have to get. I would argue that the growth mindset is how you get to those standards. And I think maybe teachers, not just teachers, I think parents do this a lot. And one of my biggest things in therapy is helping parents to see the growth mindset as the pathway. And so it's not just saying like, oh, you got it right, or oh, you got it wrong. It's saying, wow, you tried so hard. Look at how much you're learning. And so doing that is instilling motivation in the child. And so, yeah, we want the child to eventually have readable handwriting, right? That might not be the only purpose or even the main purpose or even the secondary purpose of that particular task, but giving that reinforcement that the child tried, that the child can take pride in their work and their effort, all of that is teaching that child to pay attention to certain parts of their work assignment, and it's growing that child and it's building their self-esteem, and that's what's moving them towards the standards. And so I really think that all adults involved in that child's life have that responsibility to build that growth mindset. And just like Paul's saying, like, we're not expecting any child to be perfect and to meet the exact standards at a grade level, but it's more about that child understanding that they can do whatever they choose to do, right? Whether it's becoming a mathematician or a writer or whatever, it's that growth that they can accomplish. And that's our job, is to instill that in them.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to jump over to Amanda Stein. She has a question for the panel. Amanda?
Hi. Thank you all. This has been super interesting. And I have a kind of related question. I have a lot of client families who have kids with special needs, and it's been already really frustrating for a lot of them, lots of anxiety around how to advocate for their family within the school system, and get the supports that they need for their child to do the online learning thing. And I was wondering if you all had recommendations for how they can best advocate for themselves, and or what things or how they might ask for effective things, given that, I mean, they definitely understand how much pressure and how chaotic it is for the school workers as well. But, you know, at the end of the day, they want to make sure their kid can learn and I mean, and hang in there for 20 minutes during their class kind of thing. So any tips that you all had for that would be appreciated.
I would start by saying, one, make sure they know that as a parent, they have every right and opportunity to do that. So making sure they know it's okay to call the school. It's okay to question things when it doesn't seem right, and to use your parental instincts, right? I mean, as a parent, even working within our system, there have been like 1 or 2 times in my kids' 10 years, you know, as they navigated our system, where I had to go, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Let me follow up and ask some questions, right? And I know how to do that, but I think if we can encourage our parents that it's okay to call the system and say, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm feeling about how my child's being served, and asking some questions. And if the answers don't seem legit, I think then it's okay then to call. I encourage them always to call the school, the source that's closest to their child's services. But if it still doesn't seem legitimate, I think asking at a system level, because you know what? Sometimes I don't know what I don't know as a principal. And if I'm not doing something right, or if I'm not even sure, then it's okay for my boss downtown to call me and say, hey, this is what a parent's wondering. Can we have a further discussion around it? Because, you know, I could be blowing it, you know, and if I'm leading my staff, then I need to know that I should probably look at it differently collectively. So I think just letting parents know they should advocate for their kids and continue to give the parents you serve the strength to do that, because I think that's the right thing to do. And then as a system, it's our responsibility and our duty to listen to parents when they call, even when it's uncomfortable, so that we can be more responsive and actually meet those children's needs a little bit better. Especially right now, there's a lot of anxiety, and someone pointed it out earlier. In particular, our families who have students with an IEP or a 504 plan. And, you know, we're proactively trying to already set up times where we can meet with each family and say, how are we going to make this work within a limited amount of time, with a limited amount of resources, with social distancing and masks and all those constraints that we have at the school level. And it may not be perfect while we're at a distance, but we're going to do everything we can to make it work.
So I would say for children who are already identified as having a disability and have an IEP or a 504, recognize that as a parent, you're on the team and your opinion is an official part of that team. And so I would also say that for the crisis schooling, you were the implementer of that education for that child. So the data you collected is legit data. And you can write down qualitative antidotes, like my child can only sit in front of the computer for 30 minutes and then their attention is gone. That's legit data. You can present that to the IEP team and say, my child needs to have a break every 30 minutes. And maybe that just means 5 minutes going outside and playing with the dog. And that's going to actually help your child to engage in school this year. So you already have data. Write down everything that you noticed, because I think you're not starting from zero. You've already had several months of learning about how your child functions and works at home doing this homeschooling thing. And then, you know, if your child is going into the school and having to wear a mask, there are strategies you can do to help your child to desensitize to wearing a mask. And so you can work on doing that to help them to be better with that, or even just practicing social distancing if your child has difficulty keeping their hands to themselves, things like that. And I think any school system is going to want to help you with any of those interventions, because everybody wants your kid to be successful. So the first thing I would do is write down everything that worked last year by the end of your time doing crisis homeschooling, because that data is valuable. And then the school can work with you to see what they can do. I mean, you're helping them, right? Because they might not be aware of what you had to do to help your kid. And so that's where I would start. Yeah.
I would also mention too, just really briefly, I had several parents ask me last year to sit in on classes And so I would and observe, because they might be teaching or having their own position. And so I would also sit in on classes and look for behaviors. And then I would also have meetings. So sometimes even if they didn't have a 504 IEP, I would go ahead and meet with the teacher, myself, the student, and the parent, just to kind of start that conversation going. And then we at our school, at least, we start with the school counselor before it even goes to the school teacher, then the school counselor, then it seems to move to SPED. But she always pushes data, our school counselor does, before, because I'm a therapist in the school, before she'll even let it be evaluated by SPED. So I would kind of help with that gateway and advocate. So that's another thing I would say is, if they're able to get a counselor or somebody even to observe their child through this format. And I'll a lot of times block myself out so they can't see me, because of course there's that anxiety. And then on another comment on that, getting things documented now, because I do work at a university, some of these documents will follow you through college. And so realizing that what you start to put in place now, and I know Leslie, you probably are aware of this too, it can follow you, because we have disability services. So some of this stuff will follow you and can help you be successful in the college classroom too. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those answers. We're going to take one more question right now, and this will be our last group question before we wrap it up for the day. Recognizing we are going to go a couple minutes over. If you do need to head out, we totally understand, and we thank you for joining us today. Keep in mind we have the WAMP conference coming up in September, and mark your calendars for the 4th Friday in October for our next community conversation if you do need to head out. But with that, I would like to ask Acela Fetch to join us and ask her question for the panel.
Thank you. So my question is really coming from the lens of that I work in racial equity. I have a 13-year-old daughter in the Seattle Public Schools, and I'm also a MSW student at the School of Social Work, studying integrative and mental health practices. And so my question is really more about how can schools make time for mindfulness so that we are addressing the emotional and physical needs of students while building community?
I will jump in if that's okay, since I teach yoga too. I think this is so difficult right now. Right at our school, sometimes we would start the day with a mindfulness moment, like just feeling your feet on the ground, or like I'm holding my dog, my fingers on his fur, closing the eyes, or whatever you feel comfortable, eyes open, eyes closed. And I think even asking the teachers to do this, oftentimes, like, are you even in this room right now? It's what, 12:30, like I've already, am I gonna have lunch? Are you even in the room? And so I honestly think you can advocate for this even with the school, because we are seeing a movement more towards this. I know I've done like Yoga Bunny in classrooms. There's even a cute little 2-minute video that even helps soothe me, but I'm starting to see this movement happen, and we are going into a lot of classrooms. We've been invited in to teach mindfulness and yoga, but I do think in this format it might likely even be needed more. And one thing that we do, I like a lot of times too, is without looking directly, they'll say, like when we start, without directly even looking at everybody's faces, simply acknowledging the screen, the feelings, the thoughts, and just like small, simple things, so that even you just take what colors come out to you, text, is there any texture that you're sensing underneath you as you're sitting in your seat? And I won't lead a whole mindfulness exercise now, but in other words, simply bring an awareness to even your place in front of the screen. And so if the teachers aren't doing that, I think that's okay to go ahead and advocate and ask, because likely the counseling team may have these resources and be offering them.
Leslie, were you wanting to jump in?
I can.
I wasn't sure if you were reaching for the cat or jumping in.
Oh, yeah. Well, my cat needs a mindfulness moment for sure. She doesn't like how much I've been talking and not using my mommy voice. Yeah, I think for sure, just following up on what Liz said, I think integrating in mindfulness, that's going to be almost on the same plane as physical exercise, good nutrition, getting enough sleep. I think helping kids to come back in Finland, one of the best school systems in the world, they do a 15-minute exercise break every 45 minutes, so 15 minutes of their hour throughout the entire day. And what parents can do if they have any kind of flexibility, if they're doing asynchronous learning, is they can mimic that, but the child has to learn how to do that, right? Like any other routine. I think it would be really nice to add in that mindfulness moment as they come back from exercise, as they sit in their chair, as they're getting ready to do their next set of learning, just to really zone them back in. Now, granted, yeah, that first week might be really hard because the kid's learning how to do it, but the kid can learn how to do it. And what they find in Finland is they don't lose instruction, even though they're doing way more physical, recess time, the kids learn so much better. And I think it is going to be helpful to have kids really learning social emotional management this year, given all the stressors of 2020. As a follow-up, as a shameless self-promotion, and this is all free, I am doing a webinar on Monday for growth mindset, and all of my learning videos and my vlog are free, where it covers a lot of this type of information. And I try to interview professionals, which I feel like our panelists, I might be reaching out to you guys, but that's at anildaclinic.com.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, we're encouraging our teachers to use brain breaks and breathing techniques and, really giving kids lots of time to pause and to reflect about learning versus it just being on to the next thing. We have a 3 hours pretty solid block in the morning that we'll be hosting kids online, and really use kind of the phrase catch and release, where you're teaching a small chunk and then kids have time to process and share, and then kind of back and forth with built-in brain breaks. So, I love that question's asked. I've made myself a note to say, how can we really not only teach growth mindset and teach movement, build in movement, but also that's a really good question. Thanks for asking that around mindfulness.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in now, and I wanted to ask if the panelists wouldn't mind if you have any resources or things that you think would be helpful, like Leslie, you were mentioning your website and your webinar, like if you'd put them in the chat so people can get those resources, and then I'll probably keep a copy of that and add it to our website in the future as we're updating that. But I would love if you guys have resources to definitely, I see that's started. So thank you very much. Again, I just want to thank the panelists for taking the time to discuss all these topics with us today, and for our participants and the people who asked questions. So I really feel like we started a great conversation. I think we're still just scratching at the surface. I think so many of these topics we could have probably done a whole day of discussion on and just be getting started. So I hope that this was a way that we kind of a jumping off point for us as systemic thinkers to really go out into our communities and with our colleagues and the families we work with, and like continue to have this dialogue and these conversations so we can keep supporting our community through this really uncertain time in so many different ways. So thank you, everyone. Again, just what Rochelle was mentioning earlier, our next Building a Better Us is going to be in October, on October 23rd. And then we'll be working with the conference committee to do some networking at the conference event. So if you haven't done so, register for that. It's September 25th and 26th. Yeah, thank you so much. And it was great to see everyone and have this conversation. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. We're all new at this. Just remember, we're all still new at this.
Good job, everybody. Have a good weekend.
You too.